Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out another part of Poisoner in Chief. We were interested in the combination of certain drugs with sex acts. The CIA psychologist John Gittinger testified years later. We looked at the various pleasure positions used by prostitutes and others. This was well before anything like the Kama Sutra had become widely popular. Some of the women, the professionals, were used very adept at these practices. White opened the San Francisco pad in late 1955. His street agents were the prostitutes Feldman had recruited. Gottlieb and the dry pros he favored called them certain individuals who covertly administered the material to other people. Usually the material was LSD, though from time to time Gottlieb brought some new concoctions about those effects. He was curious. If we were scared enough of a drug not to try it ourselves, one MK Ultra man said later, we sent it to San Francisco. No drug scared whites, who had used more different sorts than almost any American then alive. He grabbed a share of whatever the CIA sent him. He always wanted to try everything himself, one of his partners said. Whatever drugs they sent out, it didn't matter. He wanted to see how they worked on him before he tried them on anyone else. While his prostitutes and their clients had sex, White would watch through a one-way mirror, sitting on his portable toilet. Sometimes Feldman joined him. Their job was to observe the men's reactions to various kinds of sex and how they behaved when drugs and sex were combined. Feldman marveled at how freely men spoke when they were under the influence of this combination. He recognized it as an intriguing alternative to an old-fashioned interrogation techniques he had used in his military days. If it was a girl, you put her tits in a drawer and slammed the drawer, he explained. If it was a guy, you took his cock and hit it with a hammer, and they would talk to you. Now, with these drugs, you could get information without having to abuse people. White, Feldman, and other agents who worked at the pad observed that after sex, a man will often speak to a woman next to him. They began assigning their prostitutes to stay with several clients for several hours rather than leaving immediately. When combined with these effects of LSD, they hoped this staged intimacy would lower a man's inhibitions. To find a prostitute who is willing to stay is a hell of a shock to anyone used to prostitutes. One officer reported, it has a tremendous effect on the guy. It's about to boost his ego as she tells him he was really neat, and she wants to stay for a few more hours. Most of the time, he gets pretty vulnerable. What the hell's going on to talk about? Not the sex he just started talking about, his business. It's at this time she can lead him gently. Pleased with what considered the success of his San Francisco operation, Gottlieb ordered it expanded. At his direction, White opened a second safe house outside city limits in the Marin County town of Mill Valley, which offered the privacy necessary for experiments that went beyond sex and drugs. Among the compounds he fabricated and brought to White for testing were stink bombs, itching powder, sneezing powder, and diarrhea inducers. All were to be tested on men who had met prostitutes and expected nothing more than quick sex, or on the groups that were invited to parties. Gottlieb also supplied devices for White to test, including a drug-laced swizzle stick, an ultra-thin hypodermic needle that could be used to poison a wine bottle through a cork, and glass capsules that would noxious gases when they were crushed underfoot. Soon after Marin County Safe House opened, a couple of White's agents spent several days in San Francisco finding men that could invite to a party there. Gottlieb wanted to see if he could dose a room full of people with LSD sprayed from an aerosol can. He produced a can and delivered it to White. On the appointed day, however, according to one agent's testimony years later, the weather defeated us. Guests arrived as planned, but the room was so hot the windows had to be kept open. This made the experiment impossible. Reverses like this did not discourage White. He remained immersed in the work and did everything Gottlieb asked, always with a special flair. When he wasn't operating a national security whorehouse, White would cruise the streets of San Francisco tracking down drug pushers for the Narcotics Bureau. According to one survey of his career, sometimes after a tough day on the beat, he invited his narco buddies up to one of the safe houses for a little R&R. Occasionally, they unzipped their inhibitions and partied on the premises, much to the chagrin of the neighbors, who began to complain about the men with guns and shoulder straps chasing after women in various states of undress. Needless to say, there was plenty of dope around, and the feds sampled everything from hashish to LSD. White had quite a scene while by the day he fought to keep drugs out of circulation, and by night he dispensed them to strangers. Only by Gottlieb's unusual standards could White have been judged qualified to run Operation Midnight Climax. He knew the ways of the street, but he was not equipped to interpret people's actions while they were unknowingly under the influence of drugs. He had no background in chemistry, medicine, or psychology. A psychiatrist who's worked with the CIA, James Hamilton of Stanford University Medical School, occasionally dropped by the Telegraph Hill pad, but usually no health professionals was available in case a victim became ill or uncontrollable. Even the chemists, hypnotists, and electroshockers Gottlieb had dispatched to conduct experiments at overseas detention centers had some training and at least a vague idea of what they were looking for. In San Francisco, no one was around except White himself and occasionally Feldman or another partner. Clients of prostitutes were not White's only victims. At the end of 1957, a federal marshal named Wayne Ritchie attended a Christmas party at the Federal Building where White was based. After taking several drinks, he became disoriented. He raced to his locker, grabbed his two service revolvers, walked to a bar in the Fillmore district, pointed one of his pistols at the bartender, and demanded money. Someone knocked him unconscious from behind. Police officers standing over him when he awoke. In court, Ritchie pleaded guilty to armed robbery but could offer no explanation for his momentary madness. A sympathetic judge cited his sterling record. He was a Marine Corps veteran and had been a guard at Alcatraz, let him off without prison time. He spiraled into depression and never recovered. Only 22 years later, when he read Gottlieb's obituary, did he come to suspect that he had been dosed with LSD. He sued the CIA. Whitehead died by them, but his sidekick, Ira Feldman, admitted in a pretrial disposition that he had surreptitiously drugged people in and around San Francisco. I didn't do any follow-up, he said. I wasn't very good to go and say, how do you feel today? You don't give them a tip, you just back away and let them worry. Like this nitwit Ritchie. Ultimately, a judge denied Ritchie's claim for compensation, ruled that he had not conclusively proven he was drugged, but called the case troubling and added, if Ritchie's claims were indeed true, he has paid a terrible price in the name of national security. White was a lawman who made his own law. If he drugged unsuspected citizens because it was a legal way to make people suffer, he was reprehensible. If he did it because he believed he would be contributing to national security, it could be morally strong. Whatever it was, the main qualification was his willingness to do whatever Gottlieb wished. While the son of a bitch, but he was a great cop, he made that fruitcake Hoover look like Nancy Drew. However, told an interviewer years later, the LSD was just the tip of the iceberg. Write this down: espionage, assassination, dirty tricks, drug experiments, sexual encounters, and the study of prostitutes for clandestine use. That's what I was doing when I worked for George White in the CIA. The interviewer asked Feldman if he ever met Gottlieb. To set off an extended recollection, several times Sidney Gottlieb came out. I met Gottlieb at his pad and White's office. Sidney was a nice guy. He was a fucking nut. They were all nuts, I say. You're a good Jewish boy from Brooklyn like me. What are you doing with these crazy cocksuckers? You had this big black bag with him. He says, this is my bag of dirty tricks. He had all kinds of crap in that bag. We took a drive over to Muir Woods out by Stinson Beach. Sidney says, "Stop the car." He pulls out a dart gun and shoots the big eucalyptus tree with a dart. Then he tells me, "Come back in 2 days and check this tree." So we go back in 2 days. The tree was completely dead. Not a leaf left on it. I went back and I saw Wyatt, and he says to me, "What do you think of Sidney?" I said, "I think he's a fucking nut." White says, "Well, he may be a nut, but this is the program. This is what we do." Does this remind us of Atwa by Charlie Manson or At War? Gottlieb's visit to San Francisco was not a purely business purposes. Operation Midnight Climax gave him ready access to prostitutes. According to Ira Feldman, he took advantage of this prerequisite. He was cock crazy, Feldman said, while free associating with Gottlieb during a legal deposition near the end of his life. He recalled complaining to George Hunter White, "All he wants to do is to get laid. Anytime that fuck came to San Francisco, give me a girl," Feldman said. He always needed a girl. Feldman could not help adding, with a measure of pride, that every woman he supplied to Gottlieb serviced him free of charge. "All these girls I ever fixed Sidney up with," he said, "never took any money from him. It was a favor to me." And if that's not startling enough, Feldman added that Gottlieb had also carried on an affair with White's free-willing wife, Albertine. Gottlieb was humping his wife, he said. They were very good friends. I'd always pick him up. We'd go there. We'd sit. I don't drink. Before you know it, White passed out in the bedroom, and Sidney was on the couch with the old lady humping her brains out. George knew, but he thinked he loved her very, very much. We're going to end here because this is getting crazy. We got one more little part to read, which will be the conclusion of Operation Midnight, which goes into the next chapter called The Divine Mushroom. But I just may change my reading now to the Manson file again in the Scientology Church. And why is there a missing Charlie Manson file in the Scientology Church? I have no idea. I'm not a Scientologist. I'm a Christian. Have a good day.